Ford just killed one of the most popular vehicles in America. And if you're one of the millions of people who bought one, you need to hear this before you make your next move. I'm talking about the Ford Escape. If you don't drive one yourself, you almost certainly know someone who does. It's been one of Ford's best-selling vehicles for over 2 decades. It outsold the Bronco and the Bronco Sport combined last year, and Ford just confirmed it's dead. Production ends after the 2026 model year, and it's not coming back. Here's what should really worry you. The Escape isn't some low-volume flop nobody remembers. This is a car that millions of people are driving right now, today, in their driveway, on their way to the grocery store, or picking up grandkids from school. And Ford didn't do this because the car was failing on the road. They did it because of what's happening behind the scenes at that company, decisions being made in boardrooms that have nothing to do with whether your Escape runs fine. Once you hear the full list of what else they've already killed, you're going to start asking a very uncomfortable question. Is my car next? There's one vehicle coming up on this list that might be the strangest cancellation of all. Ford poured billions of dollars into it, called it the future of the entire company, put it on magazine covers, and then quietly started walking it back within a couple of years. Stick around, because when we get there, you'll understand exactly why trusting Ford's promises is getting harder every year, and why the badge on the hood doesn't guarantee anything anymore. Let's start with what actually happened to the Escape, because the details matter here, and a lot of owners still don't fully understand what this means for them. Ford announced that both the Escape and its Lincoln twin, the Corsair, are being discontinued at the end of the 2026 model year. These two vehicles share a platform, they're built in the same plant, and Ford is killing them together, in one move. For the Escape, that's the end of a run that goes back to the year 2000. This was the vehicle that helped save Ford after the 2008 financial crash, when the American auto industry nearly collapsed, and Ford was one of the only major automakers that didn't take a government bailout. The Escape was part of what kept the lights on. It was one of the first compact crossovers that actually felt like a real car, not a truck pretending to be one. And it became the default recommendation for anyone who wanted something practical without the bulk of a full-size SUV. Millions of retirees bought this exact vehicle for very specific reasons. It was small enough to park easily in a tight grocery store lot. It sat tall enough that getting in and out didn't require the kind of knee bending a low sedan demands. And it was cheap enough to run, on gas and on maintenance, that it didn't eat into a fixed income the way a bigger SUV would. This wasn't a car people bought because it was exciting. They bought it because it simply worked, year after year, without drama. And the sales numbers back up that this decision didn't come out of nowhere, even if Ford acted like it did. Through the middle of this year, Escape sales had already dropped by more than 2/3 compared to the year before. That's not a small dip. That tells you Ford was already quietly winding down production and pulling back on marketing well before the official announcement ever came out. They let the car die slowly first, then made it official once the numbers gave them cover. That's important to understand, because it means the company knew this was coming for a while and didn't say anything to the people still buying and driving these vehicles. So what does this actually mean if you already own one, or you're shopping for a used one right now? A few things, and none of them are good news if you don't plan ahead. First, resale value on a discontinued model tends to soften over time. Buyers get nervous about long-term parts availability and support, and that nervousness shows up in what they're willing to offer you. Second, dealerships stop stocking new inventory almost immediately once a model is cancelled, which means fewer trade-in offers on the lot and less competition working in your favor when you go to sell or trade. Third, and this is the one people don't think about until it's too late, Ford is going to funnel its marketing dollars and its service department attention toward whatever replaces the Escape. Historically, that means the outgoing model gets pushed to the back of the line at the service counter, parts take longer to source, and technicians get less ongoing training on a platform the company has already mentally moved on from. The Escape and the Corsair are not isolated incidents, and that's really what matters here. This is a pattern, and it's been running for years, mostly out of sight. Ford has quietly killed off 8 other vehicles over the past several years, some of them just as popular as the Escape, some of them representing hundreds of millions of dollars in investment that got written off almost overnight. If you want to understand what's really going on inside this company and whether the car sitting in your garage right now could be next, you need to see the full list, because the pattern only becomes obvious once you see it laid out end to end. Number 8. The Ford Taurus. If you're over 55, there's a very good chance you or someone in your family owned a Taurus at some point. This was Ford's flagship sedan for nearly 4 decades, and for a stretch in the late 80s and early 90s, the Taurus was the best-selling car in America, full stop. It outsold the Honda Accord, it outsold the Toyota Camry, and it did it while being built right here in the United States, at a time when American manufacturing quality was genuinely being questioned by buyers who had started drifting toward Japanese brands. The Taurus was Ford's proof that they could still win on their own turf. Ford ended production of the Taurus in 2019 as part of a much broader decision to walk away from traditional sedans almost entirely. The reasoning Ford gave publicly was that American buyers had shifted hard toward SUVs and trucks, and the company wanted to put its manufacturing dollars where the demand actually was sitting. That's a fair business explanation on paper, but if you were one of the loyal Taurus buyers who kept coming back generation after generation, trading in one Taurus for the next new one every few years, it probably didn't feel fair at all. One day, it was one of the most recognizable names in the American auto industry. The next, it simply stopped existing, and Ford didn't offer much of an apology for the customers left holding one. Number 7. The Ford Fusion. The Fusion was supposed to be Ford's answer to the Camry and the Accord, and for a while, it actually delivered on that promise. It was a genuinely competitive mid-size sedan, with sharp styling that didn't look like it was designed by committee, and a hybrid option that got real-world fuel economy numbers retirees appreciated, especially anyone doing a lot of highway driving between doctor's appointments or making the drive to visit grandkids a few states over. Ford ended Fusion production in 2020, right in the middle of that same sedan purge that killed the Taurus. The official line was the same story you'll hear repeated across most of this list. Sedans don't sell like they used to, so resources moved to SUVs and trucks, where the profit margins were bigger. What Ford doesn't advertise as loudly is that a lot of Fusion owners got left holding a car that dropped in resale value faster than it would have if the model had simply continued production. Buyers see a discontinued nameplate and immediately start negotiating harder, assuming parts and service will get more difficult down the road. If you're currently driving a Fusion, or you're looking at a used one, that's a real number to factor into your decision, not just a talking point. Number 6. The Ford Focus. This one stings for a different reason than the Taurus or the Fusion. The Focus wasn't a niche vehicle propped up by loyal fans. It was one of the best-selling compact cars on the entire planet for years, sold across dozens of countries. Reliable, cheap to insure, cheap to fix. Exactly the kind of no-nonsense car that made sense for someone on a fixed income who just needed dependable transportation without paying for a bunch of features they'd never use. Ford pulled the Focus from the US market back in 2018 as part of that same strategic pivot away from cars and toward SUVs and trucks. Here's the part that should really bother you. Globally, the Focus kept selling in other markets for a while longer after it disappeared here. That tells you this wasn't really about the car failing to find buyers somewhere in the world. It was about Ford deciding American buyers, specifically, weren't worth building small, affordable cars for anymore, because the profit margin on a truck or SUV was simply better. If you liked the simplicity of a Focus, Ford basically told American customers to go look somewhere else, while still building the same car for people overseas. Number 5. The Ford F-150 Lightning. Remember that vehicle I told you to watch for at the start of this video? Here it is. Ford spent billions of dollars developing the all-electric version of its best-selling truck, the F-150, and when it finally launched, Ford executives called it nothing less than the future of the entire company. It landed on magazine covers. It qualified for government incentives. Ford genuinely believed or at least said they believed, that this truck was going to redefine what an American pickup could be, and they bet a massive amount of capital on that belief. Then reality hit. Electric vehicle demand slowed hard across the entire industry, not just at Ford, and Lightning sales fell off a cliff, dropping more than 70% year-over-year by early this year. Ford has been quietly scaling back Lightning production ever since that slowdown started, and industry watchers widely expect it to be phased out entirely rather than continue on as a mainstream product in the lineup. Think about what that actually means for a second. This wasn't some overlooked economy car that nobody was paying attention to. This was Ford's flagship bet on the future, backed by billions in investment and a full marketing blitz aimed at convincing the entire country this was where trucks were headed. And it still couldn't survive contact with real-world demand. If Ford will pull the plug on something they promoted that hard, with that much money behind it, what does that tell you about how much loyalty they actually have toward any single model, including the one currently sitting in your driveway? Number 4. The Ford Fiesta. For a lot of younger drivers and budget-conscious buyers, the Fiesta was the entry point into owning a Ford at all, often a first car bought for a kid heading off to college, or a second vehicle for a household watching every dollar. Small, cheap, easy to park downtown, and easy on gas for anyone doing a lot of city driving. It wasn't flashy, and it never pretended to be. It just did exactly what it needed to do, reliably, without much fuss. Ford discontinued the Fiesta as part of that same broad retreat from small cars, prioritizing SUVs and trucks, where the profit margins are simply bigger for the company, even if the vehicles themselves cost more for everyday families to buy and run. The Fiesta had sold in the millions worldwide, across more than 4 decades, and for years it was one of the 6 best-selling cars in the country by unit volume. That kind of sustained demand usually keeps a model alive. It didn't here, because Ford had already decided volume alone wasn't the metric that mattered anymore. If you or a grandchild ever owned one of these, you know it was a perfectly good little car that Ford simply decided wasn't worth its factory space. Not because people stopped wanting it, but because Ford stopped wanting to build it. Number 3. The Ford Edge. This one is more recent, and it matters because it shows this pattern hasn't slowed down at all, even after all the backlash from earlier cancellations on this list. The Edge was a mid-size crossover, roomier than the Escape, more road-focused and comfortable than the boxier, off-road-leaning Bronco. Ford ended Edge production entirely, converting the plant that built it over to other vehicles the company decided were more profitable. Sales figures tell the story clearly, and they're not subtle. In the most recent reporting period, Edge sales were down 100% compared to the year before, simply because the vehicle wasn't being built anymore at all. If you own an Edge right now, you're in almost exactly the position Escape owners are about to be in over the next year or two. Parts availability starts to tighten gradually. Dealerships stop prioritizing service appointments and stock on outgoing models in favor of whatever's currently selling. And resale value softens over time because buyers know there won't be a next generation coming to keep interest and demand alive in the used market. Number 2. The Ford Flex. If you know cars, you probably have a soft spot for this one, even if you never owned it yourself. The Flex was Ford's oddball, a boxy, retro-styled wagon/SUV that never looked like anything else on the road. Love it or hate it. It got genuinely strong reviews when it launched, praised for its interior space and its unusual, confident design, and it even earned a nomination for North American Car of the Year, one of the industry's most respected honors. But it never found a big enough audience to justify keeping the line running, and after a full decade in production, Ford quietly discontinued it. What makes the Flex worth including on this list, more than almost anything else here, is that it proves that even when Ford builds something well-reviewed, well-engineered, and genuinely different from everything else on the market, that's still not enough to guarantee it survives if the sales numbers don't hit their internal targets. Being good isn't the bar Ford is measuring against. Being profitable enough, fast enough, is the actual bar, and almost nothing else matters once a model falls short of it. Number 1. The Ford C-Max. Rounding out this list is the C-Max, Ford's compact hybrid and plug-in hybrid hatchback. It was aimed directly at buyers who wanted strong fuel economy without stepping all the way up to a full hybrid sedan, a smaller, more efficient option for people who mostly drove around town. It never sold in huge numbers compared to Ford's mainstream models, and Ford quietly wound it down as hybrid buyer demand shifted more toward SUVs instead of smaller hatchbacks. Of everything on this list, the C-Max is probably the one fewest people will actively miss, simply because fewer people ever bought one to begin with. But it still represents the exact same pattern playing out one more time. Ford builds something, markets it, sells it to loyal customers for years, collects their money and their trust, and then walks away the moment it stops being convenient for the company's bottom line, with very little regard for the people who bought in early. Before we get to what this all means, it's worth asking why this keeps happening at Ford specifically, more than it seems to at some other automakers. Part of it comes down to tariffs and rising material costs, squeezing margins on lower-priced vehicles harder than on trucks and SUVs. Part of it comes down to the expensive, uneven transition toward electric vehicles, which is eating up billions in investment, while demand for EVs has cooled off faster than automakers expected just a couple of years ago. And part of it is simply a company that has decided, repeatedly, that a shrinking lineup of higher-margin trucks and SUVs is worth more to shareholders than a broad lineup that actually serves every kind of buyer, including the ones who just want something small, affordable, and dependable. None of that is a conspiracy theory. It's in Ford's own earnings calls and investor presentations, year after year. The company says it plainly. Fewer models, higher margins per vehicle, less exposure to segments where profit is thin. The problem is that strategy gets talked about in dollars and percentages in a boardroom, while the actual consequences land on real people trying to figure out what to do with the car they already own. So if you want to protect yourself, here's what actually matters. Not vague advice, but specific things you can check today. Start by looking up your own vehicle's production numbers for the past 2 or 3 years. If sales have been dropping sharply the way Escape sales were before this announcement, that's often the earliest warning sign, well before any official statement comes out. Next, check whether your model shares a plant or a platform with something else Ford has already discontinued or is rumored to be cutting, the way the Escape and Corsair were tied together. Shared platforms tend to get cancelled together. And finally, pay attention to how much attention a model is getting in Ford's own marketing right now. If a vehicle has quietly disappeared from commercials and dealership displays while something newer gets pushed hard, that's usually not an accident. So here's where that leaves you. 8 vehicles, already gone. Now a 9th, the Escape, and its Lincoln twin, the Corsair, joining that same list. That's not bad luck, and it's not a coincidence repeating itself by accident. That's a company that has shown, again and again, over more than a decade, that no model is safe if the numbers stop working in their favor, no matter how many people are currently driving it, and no matter how loyal those customers have been over the years. If you're currently driving a Ford, or you're shopping for a used one right now, don't just look at the sticker price or the monthly payment. Look at how long that specific model has actually been supported without interruption. Look at whether Ford has been quietly trimming production before any official announcement ever comes out, the way they did with the Escape this year. And look at how the automaker has actually treated owners of every model on this list once the plug got pulled, not just what they said in the press release. That's the real due diligence dealerships hope you never bother doing, because an informed buyer is a lot harder to upsell and a lot harder to lowball on a trade-in. None of this means you have to walk away from Ford entirely, or that every Ford on the road today is a bad buy. Plenty of these discontinued models are still perfectly good vehicles for years to come, as long as you go in with clear eyes about what discontinued actually means for parts, service priority, and resale down the road, instead of finding out the hard way after you've already signed the paperwork. If this saved you from making a bad decision, or from getting blindsided the way a lot of Escape owners are feeling caught off guard right now, stick around. There's more where this came from.